Hi, and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your Literary Hype Woman, and today's author conversation is a celebration of Lunar New Year, which is February 10th of 2024. So we are celebrating by having a little conversation with an author who kind of touches on the Chinese zodiac in one of her books. It's actually very important to Lunar Love, since this is a book about a Chinese zodiac matchmaker finding love. And the end of the Lunar New Year celebration is a lantern festival, which is the starting point of Red String Theory, which is her newest book. I'm talking about Kung Jessen. She is an absolute delight. So we are talking about all things fate, romance, food, culture. There is so much going on in this conversation, and you're really going to enjoy it. So here's my conversation with Kung Jessen. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on Literary Hype. Very exciting to have you and to talk about your books, Lunar Love and Red String Theory, which is your new one. This is kind of timing out with Lunar New Year. So kind of talk a little bit about your favorite parts of that celebration.
Yeah, we're coming up on Lunar New Year, Year of the Dragon, which is a very important year. The dragon is a beloved sign. So a lot of people will often wait to have their child in the Year of the Dragon. Is a very auspicious year. So I've seen news reports that it's going to be a big boom for births. But I'm so excited. I love Lunar New Year because it really revolves around a fresh start, but also food. So we always celebrate with dumplings and fish and vegetables and desserts and just so many good things. I'm excited to make dumplings and probably just like hang out with my family like usual. But it's the new year. So when January rolls around and I feel like I've set some aspirational dreams and hopes and goals, if that doesn't happen, I feel like I get a take two. So I love that part of it.
How important is this celebration to Chinese Americans?
It's a big one. It's of all the traditions in the year, which there are many, this is one of the most important. So a lot of it too revolves around this belief system of the Chinese zodiac. And every year there's a new year, and it goes in the order of 12 different animals. And all of these signs have great meaning. So we all have our own year based on our birth date. It's the birthday and the year. So it's not necessarily just the year. It can really fluctuate with the specific day that you were born on if you fall within that window. And it's based on the Chinese calendar. And so like in China, people take weeks off. I wish we could celebrate it that way here too, but we can't. And so it's a really important year. And then 2 weeks after Lunar New Year, it's that 2-week celebration. It's the Lantern Festival. And that's kind of the symbolism of like the end of the Lunar New Year period. That's where Red String Theory opens. Again, there's more food. There's very specific foods for different holidays, which I think is kind of fun. So this year I will be trying to make tangyuan, which is like a rice dumpling filled with a variety of fillings. Could be peanut butter, red bean, black sesame. So I will try to make that this year, which I'm excited for.
This talk of food is making me very hungry.
I know, me too.
You touched on the Chinese zodiac, which is a big part of your first book, Lunar Love. Talk a little bit about crafting a love story that is centered on the Chinese zodiac and matchmaking in that culture.
I had the idea for the Chinese zodiac and how that would fit into romance first. And I was like, I'm the year of the horse. And what would that mean if I I was married. I'm married, and my husband is not compatible with me. He's a snake, and we met online dating. So I was just thinking about how kind of funny that is with these compatibility in both the Western and the Chinese zodiac. When I first started dating my husband, we would look at our signs and look at all the different ways that we were compatible, and they were so spot on. I would be like, that is so me. I am so much that way, and he was so much his way, and somehow it works. So I thought that would be really fun in a setting in a romantic comedy, which I grew up on. I love the romantic comedies of the 90s and 2000s. And so I set out to write that. And wanted to juxtapose it with the modernity of online dating, which is what I experienced, which was kind of, and still is, a shock to me that that's how I met my husband. And so setting it with like an opposites attract, kind of like a rivals to lovers and a competition, I think it all just kind of the pieces fell into place.
And what was it like for you writing that book with so many aspects that are very personal to you?
It is interesting to write books that seem to somehow always align with what I'm going through in that moment. Sometimes, like with the one I'm writing right now, it's kind of what I'm currently experiencing, but also slightly predictive of what happened after I wrote the draft, which is kind of interesting with Lunar Love. And having met my husband online dating, being mixed race, I really wanted a book that I felt like I didn't have in, not even growing up, because this wouldn't be the audience that I would have read, the age group that I would have read at that time. But even just as a teenager and a young adult and an adult, wanting to see myself reflected in the pages as a mixed race Chinese American, I definitely poured a lot of those feelings of imposter syndrome into the pages, feeling like I'm not enough. Olivia runs the Lunar Love, which is a Chinese zodiac matchmaking company that her auntie and popo have run for decades. And a lot of that, she feels like she doesn't speak the language. Is she enough to run it? Can she take on this new generation? And now there's a competitor in the mix. And so when I write, it's never me as my characters, but they definitely take on traits that I think I'm able to pour into it and is a little bit cathartic and healing in a way.
So your new book, most recent book at this point, is Red String Theory. So for anyone who has not already seen it floating around on social media with reviews, give us a little bit of an overview of what this story is about.
Sure. Red String Theory is about two opposites. There's an artist named Rooney who believes in the red thread of fate, which is the Chinese legend that two people are bound together by this invisible red thread, and the thread may stretch or tangle, but it will never break. And so she manifests this through art, and she literally works with red string, creating these larger-than-life installations. And on a February cold, wintry day, she meets Jack, who is a systems engineer at NASA in New York City, where he is there for a conference. And the two just have a magical evening together, walking around and lantern chasing around the city until they're lost to each other. And then fate or circumstance, however you want to look at it, brings them back together.
So there's a little bit of a trend with these books of both kind of having the kind of fate-ish touch and science. What was it like kind of blending those for two separate stories and putting them together into a romance?
Yeah, that's actually so interesting. I don't know that I've thought about Lunar Love in a fatitious way before, but I kind of love that idea. I think the idea of fate is so beautiful. And so with Lunar Love, I mean, I even call it the fates of the algorithms of fate, with the way my husband and I met, with how many people there are online and in the world. I'm just like, I cannot believe that I met him. And it is fatitious in a way because he wasn't even supposed to be in New York City at the time, which is where we met. And so his timing aligned perfectly. And I had just third wheeled my sister and her now husband's date 3 too many times. It was like, I need to sign up for an online dating. They helped me make the profile. And 5 days later, I met him, and that was it. And so does feel very fictitious, but that's more my story. So in Lunar Love, she calls herself a drunk algorithm wizard because she creates a profile to try to meet the founder. And so that's a very strategic way of kind of like manipulating fate a bit. And then in Red String Theory, it really does feel like something bigger is at play. There is a thread doing its magic, and the two keep running into each other. So both felt very different to write. And I loved every minute of writing Red String Theory. It was just felt like such a hug on a warm way, where I was living in Los Angeles. I miss New York all the time. Anytime I can go there physically or in my mind, I'll take the opportunity.
Rooney, who's the main character in Red String Theory, she's kind of struggling with this creative block. And a lot of authors talk about the sophomore slump and how the second book is so much harder. Did you feel like you were processing that kind of energy while writing this book?
It's funny, the way that I wrote book 2, Red String Theory, I had just sold Lunar Love and I jumped right into writing it. So I didn't even have my editor's feedback yet. And I turned all that in and went through the process of that before anything. And I actually feel that more with the third book, because there are trade reviews, there are readers, there it just is such a different experience writing it, and I have more pressures on myself. I definitely poured a lot of that fear into Rooney with her. She has a different kind of imposter syndrome than Olivia, where Olivia's was more like racial imposter syndrome and feeling like she was enough in her own culture, and Rooney really feels like, what will people think about my work? How many people will come to see my work? And which there's a scene in the book that could literally be my husband and I's conversation, where Jack is like, well, how many people do you need to come see your work? And she, 1 million people? Do you need 1 million people to like come to this exhibit? She's like, no, I really want, like, even if I just make a difference in one person's life and one person comes to see it, like that would be enough. And breaking it down, making those fears more tangible. So often when we're putting things out into the world, whether we're artists or writers or even just in the corporate world, we put ourselves out in our work. Because I also work, I have a day job where I work in design, and I'm putting work out there too. And people are perceiving us, and people are seeing our work. They're forming opinions about it. And a lot of time that becomes a mountain in our minds where it just feels like, well, what does that mean? What's going to happen? And so breaking those into smaller chunks just for ourselves to consume is so important.
Red String Theory gives us a little glimpse into Liv and Bennett. And so it feels kind of like a little bit of a bonus epilogue. How much fun was it for you to kind of dip back into their universe for a second and let us see what they were up to?
The cameo for Liv and Bennett was so fun because I was so enmeshed in Rooney and Jack's voices and their interaction, and to bring in Olivia and Bennett into their world was so interesting to do. It was the first time I had ever kind of like world built and created this universe. And so I had to get back into their heads. I really wanted to think about where they would be at this stage in their life. And we do see what has happened post. So it did feel like a fun epilogue. It's also one of my favorite chapters because, and it's such a Liv and Bennett thing to do, which is take a traditional tradition and make it modern and bring it into the future. So they have a Zhuozhou ceremony, which in Chinese culture, on the first birthday, babies will pick an object. So an assortment of objects are laid out in front of a child, and you sit them in front of it and they pick one. And it felt perfect because it's a very fictitious tradition, because what you pick, some believe, will be what you become when you grow up. So if you pick a stethoscope, you might become a doctor. If you pick a calculator, maybe you'll be an accountant. If you pick a pencil, maybe you'll be a writer, an editor, so on and so forth. And I thought this was such a fictitious tradition which fit with the book. It's such a Liv and Bennett thing to do. But I also had a Zhuozhou when I was a baby. And I find the concept so funny because whether you believe in fate or not, I learned during the writing of this book, I asked my mom what I had picked, and she told me that I had actually picked 2 things. I picked a piece of candy, and which is funny because I have a culinary background, and I picked a pencil, which I thought was so funny. And, on the other hand, you could say, well, you knew what you picked, and that kind of guided your life because you heard it growing up. Your parents told you, you just had it in the back of your mind, and that shaped the way you lived your life. And maybe I'd heard it throughout my life, but I also had totally forgotten. And that just felt like a perfect moment throughout the writing of this. So to answer your original question, it was a lot of fun.
That's so cute. I love it. So I guess there's something to it, maybe a little bit.
There's something to it. There has to be, right?
Right. And so on Jack's side of the story, he is a NASA scientist, how much research did you have to do to kind of explain the things that he was working on?
I did so much research, and there's something to be said because about which characters I give a lot of research to, in the sense of like picking a character that I don't know a lot about, their jobs. For Lunar Love, I did a lot of research into the Chinese zodiac. While I grew up learning about the Chinese zodiac, I did not know a lot about the other characters. I didn't know about ascendants. But I do work in tech, so I did not need to research gamification, app building, design. That world I was living it. So for red string theory, art, I've just kind of grown up with art. I come from a family that loves art, and it was really the science part that I needed to read a lot of books on, listen to podcasts. I talked to systems engineers at JPL, which is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I was living in Pasadena at the time, and so it was my neighbor. Like, JPL was down the street, and I would drive by. And I think that's where that seed came from, of just being immersed in the atmosphere of incredibly smart people trying to send people to Mars and the moon. And I did a lot of reading on string theory. I did virtual tours because at the time it was still kind of shut down. This was in like 2021-ish. And so the JPL wasn't doing physical tours at the time. So I just like totally immersed myself. Rooney and Jack go on a lot of suit-ups. So I learned about the clean room. I learned about the Houston Buoyancy Laboratory. I really wanted this world to feel real, because in this artist residency, this is what the artist would do. So in 1962, when the program was created, artists like Andy Warhol, Norman Rockwell, Robert Rauschenberg would have full access to NASA and the people there. And I thought that was so interesting and cool, because they would take what they learned and create art, which is a little bit more consumable for the taxpayers who want to know what's going on. Like, if you're paying tax, you want to kind of understand what was going on with space and science and kind of these big abstract ideas. So in order for me to be able to make that part believable, I had to know enough.
I was going to ask if the artist in residence program was real. So
it is real. It's not. So they brought it back in the 2000s, but Laurie Anderson was the last to do it before Congress cut budget. So this is pseudo real, but also like a reinstated artist in residence in the book, because they sadly don't have that anymore for now. Hopefully one day again.
Rudy has a very interesting middle name. Why did you decide to give her the middle name of something?
I love this question because so many reasons. One, I thought it was funny, but two, it's a character-driven decision by Ren, who is Rooney's mom. And Ren Gao is a very famous artist. She came to fame in her 40s when she had Rooney, for a very specific art situation. And it's such a Ren thing to be like, whatever, Rooney something Gao. And she's also Red String Girl, which is RSG. So, and professionally and personally, she goes by RSG, Red String Girl, Rooney something Gao. And then I made a joke of it in the book, and I was just like, I can't cut this. So I had to try to keep it.
I love it. I was just like, wait a minute, that's really her name? Okay. Did I read it wrong?
Totally. And it's funny, my husband doesn't have a middle name. So I wanted to also represent the people who have no middle names.
My mom is one of them. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you live in Nashville, and your books have taken place in LA and New York. What's it like writing a book when you are not able to like actively go to these places where you're writing them about?
It's very interesting. So every book so far, luckily, even the third, take place in a place that I've lived or grown up. So I have lived in LA, I've lived in New York, but because I did write Red String Theory in LA, I had to rely on a lot of my memory, which, memories should not be trusted, but my memory and Google Maps was huge. I try to go back to New York once a year if I can. We love it so much. Now we're closer, so it's like an unexpected perk of Nashville. And we'll go to the places and try to just like really capture those details. Even in LA, writing Lunar Love, I did write it when I was living there and was able to kind of soak in that city atmosphere a little bit more. And right now I'm back to relying on my memory for where I grew up. So I'm hoping to get back. I have not done a proper like research trip, and I'm really thinking I'm due for one.
Oh, absolutely. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And he used to travel.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I need to.
So dumplings are an important little detail in Red String Theory, and you mentioned how they're important to the Lunar New Year traditions. And your bio also calls you a dumpling enthusiast. What's your favorite?
Oh my gosh. I just love the classic like pork, soy sauce, scallion, ginger dumpling. Also really want to try like a cheeseburger dumpling and try making one of those. Like you can stuff anything into a dumpling, which I think is probably the best part about it. Dumplings like tang yuan, which is the rice dumpling for Lantern Festival. Lately I've been loving, I just get them from, I don't want to make them, get them from like an Asian grocery store, which we don't have in Nashville, like a proper one. So my auntie drives it up for us from Georgia, and they have some good ones there. But I love all dumplings. Do you have a favorite?
Right now, there's a soup dumpling place close to my day job, and we have been going at least once a week for like 3 months. It's a problem at this point.
I am so envious. It's so good. Soup dumplings are so good.
And like they have really good wonton noodle soup. Just
Love.
I get pizza.
And
while we're talking about food, anyone who follows you on Instagram sees a lot of food on your Instagram, especially cookies. What kind of cookies are your favorite to make?
As soon as I finished my draft of my latest, I was like, I'm making holiday cookies. I don't care. So literally the next day, I made like 4 batches of cookies, which was utterly exhausting. And baking is very tiring because you have to pay such close attention to the measurements. You have to wait for the oven, like pay close attention, set alarms. But it was really delicious. And I made cookie boxes for friends. And I love a chocolate chip cookie, so those are always my favorite. But I did try an almond cookie this time around, and that is delicious. I want to make more food, so expect more photos this year. Food.
Also on Instagram, you posted about your new stamp that you're using when you're signing books. Because I've also seen this from Susan Lee. To kind of talk about what these special stamps are and like the culture of that.
Yeah, you have such great questions, which I knew you would. I was like waiting for all of your amazing questions. And I love this one because these are Chinese seals that I use to stamp my books. So in many Asian cultures, and Chinese culture in particular is where I know it from, they used to be a way to officially sign important documents or pieces of art, and they would have your name carved on them. And so it was a way to kind of like, I think, prevent like forging, and you can't create a stamp and like forge someone's name. And so the way that you might be able to a signature. And my parents lost my one, or they misplaced it from childhood when I was a baby, and had one made. And so I was like, oh, I love the idea of like having that recreated, and a la Olivia, making it more modern and kind of seeing how I could have some fun with that seal. So a lovely woman named Karen in San Francisco, she's an incredible artist, carves my seals for me, and we work together, and the process is so fun. I didn't know at the time that I would do one stamp per book. That's kind of what I'm going to do now. Is every book will have its own stamp, And it's kind of more by year than stamp. So I gave a final call for the original horse jumping over the moon stamp with my name in it for 2023. And 2024 has the stamp with the lanterns and the butterfly against a full moon and string, which I am still blown away by how Karen was able to carve that into like stone, which is wild. And 2025 will have its own. So it's kind of fun to like for each book to have its own special little stamp signature, but I always sign, I always stamp, and then I always doodle. So I love just like kind of incorporating that tradition.
It's such a gorgeous stamp with the lantern, but like it is so incredible.
Thank you. I'm blown away by it too.
You mentioned that you do have like a day job and all that. How do you approach, because like a lot of people want to be writers, but finding the time when you have to work a full-time job can be a challenge. How do you find the time to put these books out?
It's a great question. And I think when I am out of it, like out of the deadline bubble, or I'm not writing or editing or doing a very specific task related to it, I think about it more. When I'm in it, I don't have time to think about it. I just kind of am like, well, tonight I have to get these chapters done. I need to write these many words. I need to edit this chapter or that chapter. And I am like, just go with it. But ultimately, when I was writing book 2, it was the morning and the night, which I'm trying to find more balance now because it was a very unhealthy way to go about it for me. I think I definitely burned out. I think I'm in that. I'm like trying to get through that part of burning the candle on both ends. So now I try to focus it to writing at night and just pacing myself a little bit more.
What's been the most surprising thing that's happened along your writing journey?
I'm not sure that it's surprising, but more of like what I hoped. And maybe it's surprising that one of my hopes has come true of connecting with readers in such a close way. Like, I guess I didn't know what I was getting into. And maybe that is a surprise of like how generous readers are and how so many have become my friend. And I have never had a community like this before, ever. Anywhere I've lived, at any stage of my existence in life, have never had the community the way that I do now with romance readers and romance authors. And just like the community here in Nashville has been such a lovely, supportive group with booksellers and just everyone in town. It's just been wonderful. And so that has been a lovely surprise.
I love Parnassus in Nashville.
Oh my gosh.
There's 2 events there all the time that I live there. And I worked at a Barnes & Noble, and I would still go over to Parnassus all the time.
I love them. They're amazing.
Such a great store over there.
Yes.
I'm jealous you get to go there still now.
Honestly, same. They're so great.
You also have a food and film blog. How did that come about?
Yes. So A Dash of Cinema is my food and film blog. I make the food that you see in movies and TV. And that started at this point like 13 plus years ago, but I had run it for 10 years. And talking about time and not having enough, I have not been able to get to it lately. It's always in the back of my mind of like, what can I make? But I started that because I was like, I really want to find an outlet to express myself. And I just kind of had like random blogs, but I wanted to make it more focused on a topic. And I love food. I was a film major. So I was like, I'll just combine my 2 loves, food and film. And at first I would just like pull a lot of things around me from the interwebs and like make graphics in Photoshop and write about it. And then I moved into really like recipe development and cooking and making food from movies and TV. So anytime I watch a movie or a TV show, I'm like, what are they eating? How can I make that? And that's kind of where that was born.
You mentioned book 3, and there's been a post about it selling. What can you tell us about your 3rd book that's on the way?
Yeah. So Yin Yang Love Song. I love a rhyming moment. And it's my fake dating book, which and at first when I was like, oh, what tropes do I want to kind of start to write about next? This was one where I was like, but that doesn't happen in real life. And then I was like, but it's so much fun to write, and I kind of like always want to write a fake dating book, but it was born from traditional Chinese medicine herbalism, and that's the character. She's a herbalist, and he is a musician, and to advance their own career, they agree to fake date. And yeah, it'll be, I'm excited. It's still kind of like being worked out in my writing and editing stages. So I am also very curious how it'll land and where it'll go.
Well, I cannot wait because these books flew by. Which is like, as an author, you're like, I spent so much time on that, and people are reading them in like 5 hours.
Yeah. Which I guess is better than like, oh, I couldn't get through it, or like, it took me so long to read.
Yeah. And the last question, which is the most fun question.
Yes.
Since this is literary hype, what books are you hyped about?
I have been in editing mode, so I haven't had a lot of time to read lately, but there are books that I have that I am hyped about forthcoming. So I'm excited to read In a Not So Perfect World by Neely Tubati Alexander. I'm excited for Not Your China Doll, which is about Anime Wong by Katie G. Salisbury. That's nonfiction, but you know, we need Anna's story. And I'm excited for The Backtrack by Erin LaRosa, which is her next book. So I can't wait. I have advanced copies, which is like such a special treat that once I'm finished with my edits, I'm going to dive in. I'll talk about them on my Insta, so it's so people can know what I'm talking about.
Yes, and I appreciate that, like, when authors don't just use Instagram to promote their own book and they're still like sharing what they're reading, like that means a lot to the bookish community as well. So thank you for doing that.
I love that. No, I love that. That is because I never know. I'm like, oh, like I was in such promo mode that I'm like, there's so many books I wanted to hype up. So that is good to know.
It's that balance of like you want to promote there, but also like you don't want people to tune out because it's this, you're talking about the one thing all the time.
Food, books, and promo.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to Literary Hype about your books, Red String Theory and Lunar Love, and Yin Yang Song coming soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. This was fun.
Thanks to Lauren for taking the time to hang out with me and talk about her books, Lunar Love and Red String Theory. If you want to get a copy of these, the links to do so are down below, so make sure you check that out and help support the channel at the same time as buying books. It's a win-win. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.